There's a quiet kind of suffering most people never talk about, the kind that comes from knowing deep down you're not living the life you were meant to live. You go through the motions, handle your responsibilities, smile when you're supposed to, but inside, something feels off. You're not broken, just out of alignment. And in that space between who you are and who you could be, restlessness starts to grow. The Buddha understood this. He taught that our deepest pain often comes not from what's outside of us, but from being disconnected from our true nature. And the beautiful part? He also showed us a path back to balance, to peace, to clarity. In today's world, it's easy to lose ourselves, easy to get pulled in 1,000 directions, drained by noise, pressure, and expectation. But the teachings of Buddhism offer something radically different. Not more chaos, not more hustle, but stillness, wisdom, and power, rooted in presence. If you've been feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or like something needs to shift, but you're not sure how, this video is for you. We're going to explore 11 powerful Buddhist strategies that will help you level up, not just in your career or goals, but in how you show up to your own life, moment by moment. This isn't just another self-help checklist. These teachings come from centuries of practice, reflection, and deep inner work passed down from the Buddha himself. They're not about perfection, they're about progress, awareness, and peace. So if you're here not just to survive, but to grow into the strongest, most grounded version of yourself, you're in the right place. And if you appreciate the kind of mindful, soul-rooted content we share here, just a small, simple, and free gesture, I ask. Hit that subscribe button. It helps this message reach others who might need it too. And whatever you do, don't skip any part of this video, because every strategy builds on the last, and each one is a step toward your own transformation. Let's walk the path together. Somewhere along the way, many of us were taught that putting ourselves first was wrong, that it was selfish, that it meant we didn't care about others. So we started doing the opposite, saying yes when we wanted to say no, showing up for everyone else even when we were exhausted, and ignoring our own needs just to keep the peace. At first, it felt noble, it felt like love. But over time, something inside started to feel hollow. And here's the truth, when we constantly put ourselves last, we end up feeling invisible, not just to others, but to ourselves. The Buddha taught the middle path, not too much, not too little, a way of living that honors both compassion for others and care for oneself. And that includes recognizing the sacred responsibility we have to tend to our own well-being. You can't offer peace to others if you're full of inner chaos. You can't guide anyone if you've forgotten how to listen to your own heart. Buddhist teachings remind us that we must cultivate our inner garden before we try to fix the outer world. And that starts by gently making yourself a priority, not in an aggressive, ego-driven way, but in a deeply respectful, spiritual way. This could be as simple as waking up 10 minutes earlier to sit in silence with your breath. It could be drinking water mindfully, or stepping outside to feel the sun on your face before the noise of the world floods in. It could be protecting your time, learning to say not today to obligations that pull you away from your center. These aren't grand gestures, they're quiet acts of self-honoring, and over time, they rebuild trust between you and yourself. One of the Buddha's core teachings was that liberation begins within. That means our healing, our clarity, our strength. It doesn't come from others recognizing us. It comes from us recognizing ourselves. So the next time you feel guilty for taking time to rest or hesitant to draw a boundary, remember, this is not selfishness. It is wisdom. You are the vessel through which your life flows. Keep it clear, keep it nourished. Make yourself a priority, not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of awakening. You know, one of the most overlooked forms of self-respect is simply taking a moment to care about how you show up in the world. not in a shallow, appearance-obsessed kind of way, but in the quiet, intentional act of presenting yourself with dignity. There's a subtle power in waking up, brushing your hair, putting on something clean, and stepping into the day as if you matter, because you do. The Buddha taught that mindfulness applies to every action, not just what we think or say, but how we carry ourselves. And when we bring awareness to our appearance, we're not trying to impress anyone, we're practicing presence. In Buddhism, we talk a lot about right intentions, and when your intention is to honor your body, your energy, and your place in the world, even small things like grooming or choosing your clothes become acts of mindfulness. You're telling yourself, I value this life, I value this moment. It's not about chasing trends or being perfect. It's about aligning your outer presence with your inner clarity. You don't need fancy clothes or a polished look to do this. What matters is that it feels authentic to you. Something as simple as standing tall, breathing deeply, and wearing something that makes you feel comfortable can completely shift your state of mind. Think about how different you feel on days when you get ready with intention versus days when you roll out of bed and throw something on without thinking. One version says, I'm here and I care about this moment. The other says, I'm just trying to get through it. And over time, those little messages we send ourselves begin to shape how we see ourselves. The Buddha never asked us to deny our humanity. He asked us to walk through life awake to what we consume, awake to how we speak, and yes, awake to how we show up in body and spirit. Taking care of your appearance isn't superficial, it's sacred. It's a reflection of your relationship with yourself. And when you feel aligned on the outside, it often supports the calm and clarity you're trying to build on the inside. So ask yourself gently, what would it look like today to show up with a little more care? Not to impress, not to perform, but simply to honor the life you're living right now. That is the heart of mindful appearance, and it's a practice worth cultivating. You know what's strange? We often treat our emotions like strangers at the door. We either slam it shut and pretend we don't hear the knock, or we let them rush in and take over the whole house. Rarely do we sit down with them and say, let's talk. But the Buddha taught something radically different. He taught us not to fear our emotions and not to become enslaved by them either. Instead, he showed us how to greet each feeling with awareness, not attachment. One of the most overlooked yet powerful ways to do this is so simple, so accessible, and yet so underestimated. It's the practice of smiling. It might sound almost too simple to take seriously, especially when you're navigating stress, sadness, or frustration. But Buddhism isn't about grand gestures. It's about subtle, consistent shifts that transform the inner landscape. And a smile, when rooted in mindfulness, is one of those subtle shifts that changes everything. When we smile, gently, not forcefully, it signals to the nervous system that it's safe to relax, that we are not at war with the moment. The Buddha often reminded his disciples that a calm mind leads to a calm life, and a smile is a bridge to that calm. Science now echoes what ancient wisdom has always known. Smiling releases dopamine and serotonin, the brain's natural mood enhancers. But beyond the chemistry, there's something sacred about offering a smile even when life feels heavy. It's not about denying your pain, it's about choosing how you carry it. It's saying, even in difficulty, I will meet this moment with kindness. When you smile, you don't just affect your own inner world, you ripple outward. The Buddha spoke about the concept of metta, loving kindness, as a practice that radiates from within to all beings. Your smile can be part of that radiance. It can soften tension in a room. It can invite peace into conflict. It can be the gentle nudge someone else needed to feel seen, even if only for a second. There's something quietly exhausting about constantly feeling like you need to prove yourself, like you always have to say yes, always have to be agreeable, always have to keep the peace, even when it comes at the expense of your own. It's subtle, it starts with little things. You say yes to a favor when you're already overwhelmed. You agree with something you don't believe in just to avoid conflict. You go along with plans you don't enjoy because you don't want to be difficult. And over time, those small moments add up. Before you even realize it, you've trained yourself to be agreeable, even when it chips away at your energy, your clarity, your truth. The Buddha didn't teach us to be passive or to betray ourselves in the name of peace. In fact, he spoke clearly about the importance of sammavaka, right speech, and sammakamanta, right action. That includes knowing when to speak up and when to protect your space. Buddhism teaches us the middle way, the path between extremes. And one of those extremes is self-abandonment. When you constantly shapeshift to fit into everyone else's expectations, you slowly lose sight of who you are. You might appear calm on the outside, but inside, there's often tension, quiet resentment, or a feeling that your life isn't really yours anymore. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cold. Saying no doesn't make you selfish. In fact, the Buddha taught appamada, diligence in guarding your mind and your actions. That includes protecting your inner peace from situations or people that leave you feeling depleted. It's a practice of compassion, not just for others but for yourself. You can be kind and still be clear. You can be compassionate and still walk away from things that harm you. It's not about building walls, it's about building self-respect. There's a subtle shift that happens when you begin to protect your energy, not out of anger, but out of deep self-respect. At first it feels unfamiliar, maybe even a little guilty. You're used to being available for everyone, replying quickly, agreeing to plans, taking every call. But slowly you start noticing something. You're tired, not just in your body but in your spirit. It's not that you dislike people, it's that your peace is leaking. You're giving from a place that hasn't been replenished. The Buddha once said, "Just as a candle cannot burn without fire, men cannot live without a spiritual life." And that spiritual life, your clarity, your energy, your peace, requires space to breathe. One of the most transformative teachings in Buddhism is about right association. The Buddha was clear. Who you surround yourself with matters. The people in your life either nourish your path or distract you from it. And yet we often hesitate to create space. We fear being rude, being judged, or being misunderstood. But here's the thing. Setting boundaries doesn't make you unkind. It makes you honest. And honesty in Buddhism is an essential virtue. When you limit your availability to draining people or chaotic situations, you're not closing your heart. You're choosing where your heart can stay open without being harmed. Think of it like a garden. If you're constantly letting in weeds, the flowers don't get to bloom. Your time, your attention, your presence, these are sacred. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to them. The Buddha taught the importance of right effort, meaning we direct our energy wisely. We don't pour endlessly into people who only take. We don't let our days be consumed by noise that leaves us feeling less than whole. We step back, not out of arrogance, but out of wisdom. There's something incredibly empowering about waking up one day and realizing that you no longer need to prove your worth to anyone. You stop explaining, stop justifying, and most importantly, you stop begging for understanding. It's not because you've stopped caring, it's because you've started honoring your peace. The Buddha taught that the opinions of others are like passing clouds. They come and go, ever changing, never truly in your control. So why then do we spend so much of our precious time and energy trying to shape ourselves into someone more likable, more acceptable, more pleasing? Buddhism reminds us that the path to inner freedom begins when we release our attachment to external validation. As long as your sense of self is tied to someone else's opinion, you'll never feel steady. One compliment lifts you up, one criticism tears you down. It's a fragile way to live. The Buddha taught about anatta, the concept of no fixed self. You're not a label, not a role, not someone else's idea of who you should be. You are awareness itself, and when you start seeing yourself through the lens of mindfulness, instead of through the mirror of public perception, everything begins to shift. The more you practice this kind of detachment, not coldness but clarity, the more space you create for real joy. You realize that your energy is sacred. You learn that saying less is often more powerful. You begin walking the middle path, not reacting, not defending, just being grounded in your truth. And that's when something beautiful happens. The right people start gravitating toward you, not because you changed yourself to fit in, but because you finally became real. In a world that demands you explain yourself constantly, choosing silence is a quiet revolution. And in that silence, you reclaim your power. Some people carry the heaviest burdens with the quietest smiles. They say they're fine, even when their mind is restless, their energy low, and their spirit unsettled. And over time, they begin to believe that calmness means silence, and peace means hiding how they really feel. But that's not what true peace looks like, not in the eyes of the Buddha. The Buddha didn't teach us to suppress our emotions or pretend everything is okay. He taught us to understand the nature of our minds, to sit with discomfort and to remain steady, not by ignoring the storm, but by learning how to stay rooted within it. Life will test you, not once, not occasionally, but constantly. Stress, setbacks, disappointment, they're part of being human. But what matters most is how we respond. Do we let those moments control our state of mind? Or do we learn to return to our breath, to center ourselves, and to meet chaos with presence instead of panic? The Buddha said, "Rule your mind, or it will rule you." And this teaching becomes especially powerful when life feels like too much. One of the most accessible practices in Buddhism is using the breath to anchor the mind. Inhale, feel the breath come in. Exhale, release the tension. This isn't just poetic, it's neuroscience. When we consciously slow our breathing, we calm our nervous system. The brain interprets that slow breath as a signal of safety. And from that space of inner safety, you're able to see more clearly. You're no longer reacting, you're responding wisely. Another tool is mindful reframing. Instead of seeing stress as punishment or failure, we can see it as a teacher. The Buddha taught that nothing is fixed. Everything is always changing. Even the hardest moments are temporary. When we begin to observe stress, not fear it, we learn from it. We begin to ask, what is this teaching me? Rather than, why is this happening to me? And don't underestimate the power of letting go. Many times, stress lingers not because of the moment itself, but because we keep mentally holding on to it. Buddhism teaches us to release attachment, not just to things, but to thoughts, to the need to control, to the idea that things should be different. In that surrender, we discover something most people never realize. Calm is not the absence of difficulty, it's the presence of understanding. There's something most people don't realize until it's almost too late. Your energy is sacred. The people you allow into your space, the thoughts you entertain, the habits you keep, they all either nourish you or drain you. And yet many of us walk around tired, foggy, and emotionally burned out, not because life is inherently overwhelming, but because we've been silently leaking energy to things that don't deserve it. The Buddha spoke clearly about this. He taught that mindfulness begins not just with what you do, but with what you allow. When your energy is scattered, your peace is the first to go. And once peace is gone, clarity, joy, and presence follow. That's why removing negative energy from your life is not just helpful, it's essential. Negative energy doesn't always look loud or obvious. Sometimes it hides behind polite smiles, half-hearted conversations, or endless social media scrolling. Sometimes it's in your own inner voice, the one that whispers criticism or fear whenever you try to do something new. And because it's so subtle, it often feels normal. But Buddhism teaches that suffering arises when we are out of alignment with truth, especially our own truth. So the first step to clearing negative energy is to become aware of where your energy is actually going. Who do you leave conversations with feeling heavy? Which routines or relationships make you feel small or resentful? What thoughts come up on repeat that leave you feeling stuck? These are the places to begin. And here's where Buddha's teachings are deeply compassionate, because they don't ask you to change others. They invite you to return to your center. You don't need to confront everyone. You don't need to fix every situation. You simply need to reclaim your awareness. Because where awareness goes, energy flows. When you choose to step back from toxic environments, you're not being dramatic. You're honoring the silence the Buddha taught us to cherish. When you say no to habits that drain you, you're practicing the right effort. And when you shift your self-talk from judgment to gentleness, you're living the path of metta, loving kindness. Sometimes life feels like a giant push and pull between what we want to do and what the world expects us to do. You get advice from all sides. Be this, do that, live this way, follow that path. It's noisy. And after a while, it becomes easy to forget what you truly value. That's why so many people wake up one day and realize they've built a life that doesn't actually feel like theirs. Not because they didn't work hard, but because they never paused to ask, what do I really stand for? The Buddha taught that confusion is a form of suffering, and clarity, true inner clarity, is freedom. That clarity starts with knowing your values. In Buddhism, values aren't just abstract ideas, they're lived truths. The Eightfold Path, one of the core teachings of the Buddha, is essentially a guide to living in alignment with values like compassion, truthfulness, mindfulness, and non-harming. When your actions match your values, there's peace. But when your life starts drifting away from those core beliefs because of pressure, fear, or habit, that's when suffering sneaks in. Think about how often we say yes to things that go against our instincts or stay silent when our heart wants to speak. It's subtle, but each time we do that, we're stepping further away from our center. One of the most powerful things you can do is define what matters to you before life tries to define it for you. Not what looks good to others, not what sounds impressive, but what truly sits well in your spirit. The Buddha called this sila, moral discipline. And it's not about judgment or shame, it's about creating a steady inner compass. Because when the world pulls you in different directions, your values are what keep your feet on the ground. The truth is, you will be tested. Your values will be challenged. But when you've spent time getting clear on them, you won't feel so easily shaken. You'll know when to walk away, when to speak up, and when to stay still. And that's not rigidity, that's strength. So take a moment and ask yourself, what are the non-negotiables in my life? And more importantly, am I living them or just naming them? The path of the Buddha is not about blind belief, it's about conscious living. And your values, when chosen with care, will always lead you back to who you really are. There's something quietly heartbreaking about watching someone walk through life unsure of their own path, constantly second-guessing themselves, chasing approval, and adapting to fit the expectations of everyone around them. And maybe, without even realizing it, you've done the same. The truth is, most of us were never really taught how to trust ourselves. From a young age, we learned to seek permission to feel, to speak, to decide, to be. But Buddha's teachings offer a very different way of being. He taught that within each of us is the seed of wisdom, a capacity for discernment that, when nurtured, can guide us through even the most complex situations. That seed is your intuition, And learning to trust it is one of the most powerful things you'll ever do. In Buddhism, the path isn't handed to you. It's discovered through mindfulness, self-inquiry, and presence. No one can walk it for you. The Buddha didn't give us a rigid list of answers. He gave us tools, like the Eightfold Path and the Four Noble Truths, to help us look inward and develop our own understanding. That means you already have what you need. You just have to stop silencing it. Your inner voice, the one that quietly nudges you when something doesn't feel right. That's not anxiety or fear. That's wisdom trying to break through the noise. But it's hard to hear it when the world is so loud, isn't it? That's why the practice of stillness, silence, and meditation matters. Not to escape the world, but to tune into the truth that lives beneath it. You're not always going to have a map. There won't always be clear signs. And not everyone will agree with your choices. But that's okay. Trust isn't about having all the answers. It's about having enough presence and courage to take the next step, even when it feels uncertain. The Buddha reminded us that suffering often comes from clinging, from trying to force things or fit into molds that were never meant for us. But freedom, true freedom, begins when you start trusting your own rhythm. So the next time you feel lost or torn, don't immediately run for advice or distraction. Sit with yourself. Breathe. Listen. The clarity you're searching for is already inside you. You just need to stop doubting it. Have you ever noticed how the things you don't deal with just keep circling back? It's like life gently taps you at first. A little discomfort here, a small conflict there. But if you ignore it long enough, it doesn't stay gentle. Suddenly you're in a cycle of repeating patterns and you're wondering, why does this keep happening to me? The Buddha taught something profound about this. He said that the causes of suffering lie within us, and unless we face them, they continue to shape our experiences over and over. In other words, we can't grow past what we keep avoiding. Sometimes we think the answer is to push harder, distract ourselves, or even run. But in Buddhist practice, avoidance only delays growth. The real transformation happens when we pause, turn inward, and examine the roots of what we're feeling, without judgment, just gentle awareness. This is where mindfulness becomes a powerful tool, not the surface-level kind, but the deep, honest kind that asks, what am I really feeling here, and what am I afraid to face? That's where the path to liberation begins, not outside, but within. You might be surprised how much of your stress or emotional exhaustion comes not from what's happening, but from what you're resisting. Avoiding a hard conversation, numbing out instead of feeling grief, pretending you're okay when your heart is tired. Buddhism invites us to meet those moments with compassion and curiosity instead of fear. The Buddha didn't tell us to suppress or escape our discomfort. He told us to sit with it, understand it, and in doing so, free ourselves from it. Growth doesn't always look like moving forward. Sometimes it looks like sitting still and feeling everything you've been avoiding. That takes more courage than most people realize. But here's the beauty in it. Once you shine the light of awareness on what you've been running from, it loses its power over you. You stop living in reaction and start responding with wisdom. You move from being stuck in a loop to walking a path. Sometimes, the most important journey you'll ever take is the one inward, the quiet return to your own truth. The Buddha taught that peace isn't found by changing the world, but by changing the way we see it. So wherever you are right now, take a breath, trust your path, and remember, you are not behind, you are not broken, you are becoming. If today's reflection meant something to you, there's another video waiting on the screen that will take you even deeper into this journey. Thank you for walking this path with me, and thank you for being a part of Buddhist Journey.